Okay, we're recording. Okay, thank you, Professor Bowden, for linking up with me. It's been a while since we talked, and a lot
Yeah.
has happened. I wanted to talk to you about the Supreme Court um, decision, not the second one, not Eileen Cannon throwing the case out, but the Supreme Court decision that said that Trump had immunity. That's what I wanted to talk about. But so
Yeah.
much has happened that I don't know that that's even how important that is anymore. So you tell.
Well, it's important. It's important in the larger scale because it essentially undermines the very most basic theory of government that we have. So, it's a serious problem. So it'll come back. All the other stuff it seems more acute right now.
Uh huh.
But that was the one that undoes the whole thing. So uh, it's a big problem. So
Well, okay. So the one here, putting this on here. Okay, so that first case, what it said was well. You tell me what was the first case? What was the decision?
so you're talking about the Loper Bright decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Let me pull it up.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the Loper Bright Enterprises versus Ramondo. 2024 decided June 28th. Yeah. So essentially, what you're looking at here is the Supreme Court is arguing that there is a certain set of actions that you call official acts, right? That are associated with the job. We don't get we don't get a really good delineation or a test for what is an official act. But the reality is that anything that can be declared an official act, even if the administration itself declares it an official act or the president himself declares it an official act, the president is immune from all criminal prosecution. Obviously, not immune from impeachment. This one doesn't have anything to do with impeachment. This has to do with whether or not the president can be criminally liable
And more than that,
for.
well,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. So more than that, it also there's a presumption, right, baked into it that whatever he does is official, and that you would have to make a case. It's kind of like guilty until innocent until proven guilty. That the
Yeah,
presumption is.
yeah. So there's this weird middle ground for acts that really we don't know if they're official or not. So built into the law of this case is a mandated presumption that those actions that the president engages in will be considered official acts, and the burden of proof exists on the other side of it. So um, that's a pretty heavy burden. You got to, who's going to engage in that whole process to try to argue that something's not an official act? Um, and then, of course, all these decisions will ultimately end up in the lap of the Supreme Court, who, are, uh, largely advancing a theory of the unitary presidency, the unitary executive, which means that the president essentially should have a massive central role in government, displacing the legislature as the centerpiece of our government, right? So the president, it's the idea. Take the older idea that the president should be um, efficient and therefore only one, as opposed to having an executive, right? This was debated at the founding, where we had a plural executive, where you had multiple executives. We decided against having multiple executives because it would take them a long time to make a decision about whether or not they should do something. So when you're talking about war or an imminent attack or other sorts of things, you didn't want hesitancy or debate or those sorts of things. So we created an executive that is one, right? A singular executive. The theory of the unitary executive is something that emerges from that, and sort of expands on that and makes sort of the whole government subject to that theory that you need efficiency and power in the executive branch, as opposed to the legislative branch, which is a much more deliberative body, makes the laws for the long term, all those sorts of things. But everything, you sort of have to, yeah, you sort of have to think about it in terms of the George W. Bush presidency, and there were a number of lawyers who were arguing under the Bush presidency that Bush had all these powers, and one of them is now a law professor out at, I believe, Berkeley, which is odd. He may be somewhere else, writing on a theory of the unitary executive. So it's the Supreme Court sort of making this argument that this person has to have zero hesitancy in acting, and considering the criminal implications of your action might cause you to hesitate or to make a decision that's less bold or something like that. And this sort of removes that. So it's all built in. This has been around for a while, but the Supreme Court, I mean, they're just making a really wild decision here, given the fact that the Constitution itself says that the president would be subject to criminal prosecution after an impeachment in the normal course of law. This basically revises the Constitution, and the Supreme Court's not allowed to revise the Constitution, to change the Constitution, but this court seems to be willing to do that.
Well, they're using newspeak to do it, which, you know, the George Orwellian kind of. They're not saying that the words should change. They're telling us that the meanings change. That's one thing. The other thing I would argue is that Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, exercised a whole bunch of powers. In fact, if my understanding of it is correct, he said that when he did the Emancipation Proclamation, his Attorney General just said, "Well, at least it's not downright criminal." He doesn't know if it's legal, but it's. And so the whole thing about the Civil War was, you know, Lincoln, I think, vacillating between doing what he thought was the best thing to do and wrestling with the powers that he has and wanted to stay within them.
Yeah. I think the big issue, right, for Lincoln. You had American Political Thought with me, right?
Yeah.
I read Lincoln.
No, but I suggested showing the film to your class on a different class that I was in with you. I think political theory with you.
Okay, so Lincoln, there's this fragment of a letter that we have of Lincoln, and it's called an apple of gold. We call it an apple of gold in a frame of silver, or a picture of silver, right? Where he's trying to make the case that what's most important for thinking about who we are in the constellation of founding documents for America, the Declaration of Independence and the freedom it espouses is the most important thing. The Constitution is the tool that we use to try to achieve the most important thing. So the Constitution is not the most important thing. The freedom articulated in the Declaration of Independence is the most important thing. So the Declaration of Independence is the apple of gold. the Constitution is the picture or the frame of silver, right? That
I like
frames
that.
the
I
apple
like
of
that.
gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this document, and so what I would suggest is that the president and the Supreme Court in their decisions and the president in the president's actions need to have some sort of guiding principle, and if they're not animated by that guiding principle of the republic, which I think Lincoln would suggest is freedom, right? A notion of freedom and equality. Um, and if that doesn't exist and is not animating them, then all of these powers are really rogue powers, right?
Right.
And so if we and Lincoln is suggesting even when he's pressing those boundaries, right, in the Civil War, with habeas corpus and other sorts of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it, he's doing it for the principle of saving the republic, the freedom and the equality for which it stands, and that's the goal. That's the apple of gold that he's trying to protect, right? And if he has to adjust the frame of silver or do something to protect that apple of gold, he's going to do it, right? But an unfettered declaration that these powers exist no matter what the end or goal is that you're using them for is extremely dangerous. You can't press those boundaries, which then allow the executive to use them for personal gain, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump, that's Donald Trump's middle name,
Right.
personal gain,
Right. Right.
So that's very different, right? And so I think that's important. I think that's something that we're not keeping in mind here by thinking that we can just create a process, we can just create a rule of law, we can set up a government that has all these things that work a certain sort of way, and we don't have to regularly articulate and direct all of this toward the goal of freedom and equality, right? Of creating a society that is for these particular purposes. The processes that we set up, the government that we set up, the rights that we enumerate, they all sort of, they help, right? They help in achieving the goal, but you can lose them all if you're not constantly articulating what the goal is, right?
Well, wait a
The
minute.
goal is freedom and equality, right?
Right.
The goal is creating a society where everyone has an opportunity and we're all treated fairly in the name of justice. And justice looks like equality. Justice looks like freedom. It looks like us being able to make the decisions, largely make the decisions about what our lives are going to look like, what they're going to be like. And
Well, let me ask you a question.
if we're just creating processes that don't have any direction, or giving out powers that don't have any direction, we're in a very, very dangerous situation, because we know now that there are people out there who aren't concerned about that apple of gold. They're not concerned about protecting freedoms and rights and all those sorts of things.
Okay, so
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go
no,
ahead.
no, it's all right, and I apologize. But so the Constitution, as far as the Supreme Court's concerned, is a legal document, correct?
Say that again.
The United States Constitution is a legal document as far as the courts are concerned, especially the Supreme Court. Yes? No?
Yeah. It's a
But the
legal
Declaration of Independence is not, is it?
No.
Right. So if the Supreme Court is, like you were talking about, the guide, the apple, is the Declaration of Independence, but it's not a legal document. And I'm sure there were bad actors even back then. I'm sure that they read Shakespeare and all the old, they know how people are, and I guess the framers thought that a really bad actor might not ascend um, to the presidency. You know, somebody like Trump, they would think that the process would have weeded somebody like that out. No, yes, I don't know.
I mean, I think they absolutely thought about that process and they set up a process for dealing with it. We just now have a judicial theory that really started early on with Marbury versus Madison
Right.
and has now been taken to wild extremes that allows the Supreme Court to do away with those processes in the name of theories of government that don't make any sense, that undermine the very notions of the Declaration of Independence. So the problem here, I mean, there are two concepts, right, that we have to deal with when we think about the power of the United States Supreme Court. One is judicial review, right? The power of the court system to articulate what the law is, right? That seems to me to be a fairly sound notion. It's one rooted in the common law, going back to England. You see this all over the place in judicial systems that try to articulate and maintain the rule of law. What we've done is we've added on to that another concept, and you and I have talked about this before, called, I mean, it's the notion of judicial supremacy,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Which is that the Supreme Court is the only or the supreme articulator of the meaning of the law, right?
Right.
Which means we have fundamentally given these people, how many over time we've had? We had 5, we had 6, we had 9, we had 10, right, at one time. Now we're back down to 9. We've given these 9 unelectable people, right, people who are completely unaccountable to anything, right, the power to say what the law is, the power to say what our rights are. And we have zero recourse when they do that if nobody steps up and says, hey, this is bananas, right? So you get all these wild, strange theories. You add on to that we now have a judiciary and a Supreme Court, most of all, that is extremely corrupt. I mean, they're actively taking bribes, claiming the bribes, right? I mean, Clarence Thomas, in his last filing, I mean, claimed $4 million worth of stuff, right? Those are just bribes.
If you ask me, he's bought cheap too. I mean, because you're sitting at the Supreme Court, and you got guys with billions trying to get stuff done, and he sold out for 4 million. I don't know. I think he should have held out for more. I remember the first week of my first class with you that you were railing on the Supreme Court, and I was very surprised by that. You know, I was thinking, because like most people, I was thinking, well, the Supreme Court, these are people, well educated and have high moral character and would never do anything wrong, and you kind of, I mean, I say you opened my eyes, but the discussion opened my eyes, and now I'm like a lot of things. I'm seeing a lot of things much more clearly. Let's move to the second one. All right. So
Okay.
now we've got the Supreme Court says that the special prosecutor didn't go through the proper legislative scrutiny, and so his appointment is bogus. Therefore, anything he brings is bogus. Therefore, goodbye, Mr. Trump. See you later. You may leave now.
So you're talking about the dismissal
Yeah.
of the case,
of the case in
documents case?
Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, anything can happen, right? Our judiciary is the nature of the law here. There wasn't really an enumeration and articulation of all of this law beforehand because we don't really. I mean, we've only had we're at president number 46,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't had very many presidents, right? And the the managerial presidency, the extremely powerful presidency that we haven't even really had for 100 years yet. So some of it we haven't had, right? We created sort of the managerial state in the early 1900s, and gave the executive an enormous amount of power, right? There's another decision out there, right, that I don't know if you're interested in talking about, but the one that does away with, right, administrative powers of the
Oh yeah,
executive
yeah,
branch.
yeah. Right. Where if a if an if a department has something where they decide, let's say you need so many micrograms of lead before you say it's bad, and now the Supreme Court is the ones who say, well, we'll tell you how many micrograms of lead is safe. Is that, do I have that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, essentially, the Supreme Court takes onto themselves the power of being able to decide what administrative law should be, and out of the hands of the experts who work in the administrative branches,
But wait,
right?
at the end of the day, though, didn't they always have that power where they could have said, "Well, we don't agree with what you've done"? I mean, the administrative state didn't have the last word anyway, did they?
There was a level of deference to expertise in the administrative branch, and that's what you got in the Chevron case,
But it
right?
wasn't codified by law.
It wasn't codified by law. I mean, these are the real problems, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we've been deferring to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court's rulings on these things for way too long, right?
Right,
And this
right.
is part of our problem. We've been allowing the Supreme Court to make all the rules for centuries, but most importantly for decades, right,
Right.
about these sorts of matters without actually taking them up legislatively and understanding the United States Congress to be the centerpiece of our entire system of government. And now they're so not the centerpiece that they don't really get anything done at all.
Well,
I
let me
mean,
ask you this: do you think
okay.
Brown versus Board of Education would have ever been done by the Congress? I mean, you think that school integration would have ever been done by the Congress? That it was the Supreme Court who did it, and everybody screamed and yelling, and it took. And in fact, even today, there are many, many schools that are not integrated. It's never been popular. There aren't enough minorities to make it popular, but it happened because the Supreme Court has, a lot of weight.
They
So,
do, but I'm not sure. I think there are studies. There are some studies out there that are very convincing, who study what we call judicial politics.
uh huh.
That the Supreme Court is a very conservative branch in the sense that it doesn't do anything unless it thinks that there's a democratic will for it. So my
There was no Democratic will in 1954 that I'm aware of.
I mean,
I mean, it wasn't
I think
until
a lot
like
of the
10 years
country.
later that
I think a lot of the country. I mean, you're thinking about the South, right? I mean,
I'm
the
thinking about
South
the
was
country. And I grew up in New York, okay,
right.
and on Long Island, where a lot of Jewish people, second generation immigrants, a lot of people who to talk to them, and today, in 2024, very, very, very liberal, very, very. Uh, they're not. These are people who aren't racist on the DNA level, kind of racist kind of people, and even they, because of cultural um, things, weren't interested in integration. They didn't necessarily think black people were lesser. They just didn't want, they just, they'd been poor and disenfranchised for so long, and just, didn't want to have to deal with them. Is what that was the feeling that I got. It wasn't racism like calling you the N word or something. It was racism like you're. My mom told me to say when I was very young. She said the difference between the North and the South is that in the South, white people don't care how close you get as long as you don't get too big. And up north, they don't care how big you get as long as you don't get too close.
Um, I don't have the experience that you have up north. I mean, I lived in the Midwest for quite a while. I will tell you that I don't think Brown versus the Board of Education legislation was so far outside the boundaries of what the Democratic will would allow that it was what we would call counter majoritarian.
I understand.
I don't think it was that it. What I hear you articulating, and this may actually be true, and I don't know if people have actually studied this or not, that if it is, I mean, a Supreme Court decision on a particular issue like Brown and integration is much more efficient than dealing with it at the legislative level, even at the federal legislative level, much less all the state legislative levels, right, or
Right.
the local levels,
Right.
So a Supreme Court decision makes it much more efficient, right? But even there, what you're doing is you're articulating rights, right? You're articulating fairness and equality. You're articulating things that are associated, right, with that apple of gold.
Well, who should do it if not them?
I mean, Congress should do it, right?
Congress won't do it. Congress has got people like
I mean,
Matt Gaetz.
They've done a lot of things since then.
Well,
right?
yeah,
They
but
passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, all the Civil Rights Acts. They passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was overturned by the Supreme Court. So, at least partially, I mean, basically gutted it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we've got these voting problems, right? So, I mean, they have done a lot of things.
Yeah. All right.
So,
So let's move on to the third thing, if you don't mind. And this is the
Okay.
kicker. All right. Well, the third it's like the third and the fourth, but they're mixed together. So my wife and I were sitting, and couldn't wait to see the debate, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And less than 2 minutes into the debate, I had to get up and leave. I felt like throwing up. I was heartsick. And what made me the sickest is I felt like the DNC had been blowing smoke up my ass for years. Because this doesn't just happen. You and I both know. We've had elder parents that we took care of, That didn't just happen. That wasn't an episode. I call bullshit on that. And they should have said something. And what I don't understand is why would the DNC, I kind of got it about Hillary. They said, well, it was her turn, right? They felt like it was some kind of debt that the DNC owed Hillary, and so they ran her. And she lost to, so I just can't believe it. Anyway, so now we've got this guy, who was a great, I love Joe Biden. Don't get me wrong, I do. The few gaffes that he's made politically in the very long time he's been in office, everybody's human, no big deal. This guy's heart's always been in the right place, but he lost his fastball, and they didn't tell us. And he's not, I don't see him doing another 4 years. And to be honest with you, who wants a president who needs that much handling and care? When you have so many people who I think that we both respect. I kind of like Gavin Newsom. I hear people saying he's slick, but there's nothing wrong with being attractive and graceful. I mean, Obama was all of that.
Calm down.
Come on, man. And so, all right, so there's that. Let me put that aside. Okay, so I was all butthurt. Then, this weekend, God moves Trump's head out of the way when a bullet goes by. And oh my, anybody who believes in God now is going to think that God spared this guy and put his finger on him. And a whole bunch of nuts who never thought they were going to vote for him, he's going to win in a landslide. And I don't know what's going to happen to me and mine. I really am scared. Maybe he is so inefficient. Maybe he's so narcissistic. He's so wrapped up in himself that he won't be able to actually get the things done. But the people around him, he's surrounding himself with the very worst kinds of politicians I've ever seen. I couldn't imagine Marjorie Taylor Greene getting elected to Congress. Matt Gaetz getting elected, I can see it, but after he's been accused, forget whether you prove it or not, he's accused of diddling little girls and he's still there. So anyway, so now between that debate and Trump jumping up like Sylvester Stallone and throwing his hands in the air and yelling "fight," and these, oh my God, I just know this guy's going to get reelected. I don't know what's going to happen after that. He's too old. The only good thing is he's not 40. he's so old that he may not be able to make it to another term. I know he's got 2 terms in, but he's going to try to change that and stay in office. Perhaps, I don't know. But if he did want to, I think he's about to age out anyway. So that's the only thing I feel kind of okay about. And I know that with this kind of cult, where it's a cult of personality and not of policy, that when he dies, there'll be, the snake will be without a head.
Uh, yeah. So, I mean, you have to understand that our system, because it's a two-party system, there's just not a lot of options, right? I mean, the party doesn't have control over Joe Biden. So when you say the DNC sort of lied to you, I mean, I don't know.
They could have told me. They could have said. They could have told us. I mean,
I don't know if they knew. I don't know if they knew.
What? Come on.
That's the thing. No, I don't know if they knew. I think they had a very tight circle around him.
You don't think Barack Obama and Donna Brazile and John Dean?
I mean, that's not. I mean, that's not the. Those aren't the people.
Well, who is?
They're not willing to come out. You're not going to have the head of your party come out and say, "Look, Biden is losing it." When you're right in the middle of a fight, right? You can't do that. Now you've got the evidence that he's losing. I mean, he's obviously
he did okay with Lester Holt. I saw him. He did a thing with Lester Holt yesterday. I want to say, and it was much better. Huh?
I thought it was bad.
Well, it's not good. I'm not going to go and say it wasn't. He wasn't comatose. Put it that.
I mean,
Jesus.
Yeah, he wasn't. It was still bad. He was extremely defensive. Those sorts of interviews are not going to do him any good. I think.
Can he win?
I don't think a whole lot of this changes a whole lot.
What?
Of things in the election. To be honest with you, it's going to be extremely close. It's always been extremely close. You're going to have a bounce here or there. We have a long time. What is it? July, mid-July. So we got August, September, October, early November. So we've got a little less than 4 months. I mean, there's going to be so many things that happen between now and then and that can happen between now and then.
Yeah, like another act of God.
I told you.
Because that's what.
That I don't think Joe can win. I mean, obviously he can win. Look, here's the things that are going in Biden's favor. The things that are going in Biden's favor is he's going against a guy who's psychopathic, right? I'm just going to say that. I know you're recording this, but
I agree. I agree he's psychopathic.
He's going against a guy who's has no idea what he's doing. He has absolutely no. He doesn't know how to be president. He doesn't know what the job of the president entails. He knows nothing about government. I heard him say the other day that it took him 3 minutes to figure out. He didn't know what NATO was.
Right? I remember that one.
Yeah, and they he said, I figured it out in 3 minutes. So this guy has no idea. So the one thing in Biden's favor is that Biden, he knows what he's doing. He has clear experience of knowing what he's doing. The last 4 years have been a very, very good presidency. He's been a very, very good president. What we're seeing now is something different from being president. We're seeing campaigning to be president again, which is very different. Now, I would say that that's one thing going in Biden's favor. The other thing that's going in Biden's favor is Trump and his movement. You call it a cult. It has cult-like features. The MAGA movement, they're laying everything bare at this point. They're not trying to hide anything, and I think we got a little proof of that yesterday, right? With the selection of J.D. Vance.
Absolutely.
As the
right.
As the vice presidential pick. I mean, they're not trying to hide anything. They're telling you we're going all in with authoritarianism. We're going all in with white nationalism. Right.
Right.
And we're going to do it. We're going to do it. right? And the base gets really super happy. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. And you see, people posting on Facebook, and it's just it's crazy, right? Um, so the other thing I think that Biden has going in his favor is that he's not gonna slow down the crazy. The crazy is gonna keep coming for the next 3.5 months. It's gonna keep coming, full speed. They can't slow it down. They can't help themselves. Okay, so
Especially
that's
now.
another thing.
You're right.
Right.
Especially, but are you telling me then that the crazy is going to turn off enough people not to vote for Trump when you and I both know that good entertainment has to be subsidized and bad entertainment makes millions, right? I mean, Fast and Furious 7 as opposed to On Golden Pond. I mean, just for snatching stuff out of my butt here, it's just that I personally, the more I study political science, and please God forgive me for this, but the less respect I have for voters because I see what they do. I see what they talk about. I see what the majority of people are not really interested in any policy unless it takes money out of their pocket right then.
I mean, I have some of those same sympathies, but the reality is that you get the voters you get, and so you've got to figure out who they are and how to communicate with them.
That's not what Madison wanted, is it?
And I don't think that there's reason to give up hope that most people at the end of the day can recognize the crazy, right?
Some people like the crazy, Jeff. Some people like it.
The crazy. I mean, that's true. A lot of people like the crazy, but those who are on the fence, right? I mean, that's the crowd that's at play right now. No one else is at play. It's a very small percentage of the country. We're looking at 4 or 5% of the electorate.
That's not the problem. The problem is turnout of the bases on each side. I personally am, and I'm you know how I am, right? I'm all out. I got all this energy. I'm very discouraged about what happened. It's not going to keep me from voting, but I imagine that there aren't a lot of people just chomping at the bit to go vote for Joe Biden, where Trump supporters are going to climb over each other to go vote for him.
I mean, I think that's a part of it too. So you got to work on turnout. I mean, it may be that this is just a very standard get out the vote operation, right? But you've got to have a message that goes along with it. And what's been more depressing to me after the debate is the way that they've handled the narrative or the discussion after the debate, right? Which has, I think, been really bad. The campaign is struggling. It's not doing very well right now. So they don't have a coherent message. The move to try to replace Biden has been fast and furious. You've already brought that up. I'll use it again. And I think not particularly well coordinated. I think it either has to get coordinated one way or it has to get coordinated the other way. And they've got to do it. And if they're not going to do it, then this is just going to muddle through, and that's not going to be good. They're going to lose. And I think you're right. I mean, I think what you're saying is right. It's not just about the small percentage of people who are one way or the other. It could be seriously a matter of turnout. But both of those are important. You can do both of those things at the same time. But the party right now, the campaign right now, is not making good moves with all of this.
Well, let me ask you. So there are a lot of people who pay attention to horoscopes. There are a lot of people who, I mean, when I say a lot, not a large percentage, but just a large number of people involved in cults and all kinds of things, that flat Earth, all kinds of things that you and I would say, what the hell, right? Every one of those people are going to see Trump's brush with death as an act of God. And that's, I mean, when that, I never wanted Trump to get hurt. I don't want Trump to get hurt. I believe political violence is what politics is about, is fighting without violence. That's why we have politics. So that we can argue and sit down and come to a consensus, and it doesn't make any difference how much I disagree with somebody. I don't want to win that way. So when somebody took a shot at him, I was very, very upset. When they missed, I was upset. And when I say missed, the reason why is because, like I said, it now looks like an act of God. And Trump, you got to give him credit for this. I mean, I don't like the guy. I'm from New York. I remember when the Central Park Five and all the racist memes a long time before he ever got there. But I certainly don't want to see him murdered. And so he jumps up and fight. It's like, geez, I've had people say to me they thought the whole thing was scripted. I say, no, it wasn't. What happened, you saw it happen. It happened. A lone nut with no political agenda, just a nut, took a shot at another politician. And the last actual political assassination that we've had in this country was John Wilkes Booth. I mean, he killed Lincoln, and he ended up, screwing up Reconstruction. And it didn't happen the way. If Lincoln had stayed in office, I think Reconstruction would have gone a whole lot differently. And so that was a political action for a political outcome that he achieved. And that's the only one I can think of.
So there are people who study political violence, and there are people who study specifically the American context. Everything I'm seeing and reading right now, this is not going to have that much effect. People who are already inclined to support Trump are going to be emboldened to support him even more for the reasons I think you've articulated. They have this providential view, divine providential view that Trump is called for a particular purpose, even despite himself. That actually strengthens the call, right? Because the call is not rooted in his character or his faithfulness or his devotion to God, right? It's just a God chose him for some sort of reason, despite him being a nutcase.
Yeah, but there were evangelists already believed that. I remember Bob Jones. He went there and said 2 Corinthians, and they didn't care. They didn't care. They think that God uses the devil. Even I mean, I was a Christian for a long time. I understand what this
right.
how they.
I guess what I'm trying to tell you is I don't think that that's going to change any minds. I just don't think that that's going to change any minds on the vote. I don't think it'll matter much at the end of the day.
Really?
No, I don't. And I think all the people who study political violence, they say there's no evidence to suggest that political violence changes anybody's mind in democratic processes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because here's America is so weirdly religious. When I say that, I don't mean they're religious the way the people in Afghanistan who have Islam, and it's all like very, very one thing. You got a couple of little sects, but pretty much it's one thing. Here in America, we've got an amalgamation of Christians that they don't. I mean, you got 2 churches on the same street that don't agree with each other. But what they do appear to have in common is the mystical God as the administrator. He's got his hand on the wheel and subtly turning things this way and that. And so, and I hope nobody listens to me say this and then say, oh yeah, Marlon said that I should vote for Trump because God saved him. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that there are people who would see it that way. And there's people who don't go out because their horoscope says it's not a good day for that. And maybe there aren't a lot of them, but it makes me nervous, Dr. Bowden.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that I would flip the causality the way that you're thinking about it. You think the religion drives the politics
of some people.
I would say more often than not, though, it's the politics that drives the religious commitments. Um, it's the cultural sensibilities that drive the religious commitments, and not the other way around. This is me being a cynical Christian, me being someone who thinks that a lot of Christians don't really understand what I think it means to be Christian, and that their views are somehow rooted in particularly today when we've got this sort of extreme polarization. I think the politics sort of serves the primary role, the causal role, and the religion sort of follows upon that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Saying?
No, it absolutely makes sense. I saw a meme where it said, the Bible's Christian. It has Christ, holding a lamb and looking at it and stroking it lovingly, and then MAGA's Christ, and you got Jesus with an AK-47, with a bandolier around his head, and I mean,
Yeah.
So here's an example. I went, I moved from Savannah out here to Toombs County, and came time to register my motorcycle. I took it over, took the tag in, and I could keep I have a vanity tag that says Tybee, where I'm from, and so she said I could keep it and just have to change the bottom where it says Chatham, and she says I could have a sticker that says Toombs for Toombs County, or In God We Trust. And I said, well, I guess I'll take the Toombs so I don't want to offend anybody. And she says, I wouldn't care if I offended anybody. And the first thing I thought was, that's the Christians I know around here. That's the Christians welcome home, you Christians, with brass knuckles.
It's complicated. I spend most of my thinking about this intersection between being Christian and thinking about politics, and the reality is that the reality is that most people don't really understand, that I know, sort of tangentially at church and other places, don't really understand Christianity all that well, and they don't understand politics all that well either, and it all just becomes a muddled mess. They tend to latch on to things that are bright and shiny. Trump is bright and shiny.
And they vote. And they vote.
They vote. There's a motivation there to be influential. There's a vote that occurs there. Now, a lot of Christians I know vote for Trump because they still have this weird sort of party thing, or they're attached to the notion of a Supreme Court that will overrule the right to an abortion, right? Those sorts of things. But I don't know. I think that's just one among a larger grouping of things that attracts them or keeps them within the Republican Party. I've had a bunch of people tell me they voted for Trump because Trump's a Republican, and they vote Republican.
Right.
It doesn't really matter.
Right.
They vote along party lines.
Right.
And they're still committed to this Republican Party that really doesn't even exist anymore.
Not that one, no.
Yeah. So.
Well, how many people do you know, besides professional clergy, who you can trust, who have actually read the entire Bible?
How many people do I know besides professional clergy who've read the entire Bible? Oh, I don't know. I don't really survey people on that.
No, I don't either. But I think
it's more about if they read it and tried to understand what it says.
I think if you read it from cover to cover, you do. All right, so
confused.
Well, it is. All right. So, in my personal experience, because I became a Christian back in 1984, and I was really, really motivated. So I read the Bible.
Were you a Reagan Christian?
No.
What's the deal with it?
No, I was a very completely non-political. Because when I became a Christian, it was about my relationship with God, and it wasn't about my relationship with my brothers and politics and stuff like that. So it was about me cleaning myself up. So I read the Bible from front to back, and then I read it from front to back, and then I read it again from front to back without interrupting, with other reading things, And I mean, I did it like I was in seminary, and I really tried to parse it out. I had my grandfather's Bible, which was a teaching Bible, and it had a lot of annotations at the bottom and stuff. At any rate, I got what I want. I'd like to think I got a first class education doing that, not just in religion, but in psychology, history, a lot of stuff that you can get from reading it. But the thing that occurred to me is after I did it and I was attending church and listening to people talk, they really didn't know what the Bible said. They were there, they were listening to what the preacher said about this thing or that. You can take verses of the Bible and apply it to things. But as far as a long-standing, long-running understanding, especially in the New Testament, about what Jesus is talking about specifically, nonviolent, specifically about having your own relationship with God and all the other things about love your brother stuff, it was, it's kind of in passing. It was about a relationship. Anyway, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds in it. It's just that it seems to me that the preaching that makes it to YouTube and that I get to watch has nothing to do with the messages of either the Old or the New Testament.
I think you're right. I think a lot of that is, there's something in the American context where our understanding of the Christian faith gets co-opted by partisan political agendas. Now, oftentimes, I'm just going to tell you this because I spent a lot of time, I have taught a lot of students from the point where I actually started teaching, which was a long time ago, back in the 1990s, right? And then at the place where I taught before Savannah State, which was a small Quaker school, which took teaching the Christian faith very seriously in all subject areas. I've always taken it seriously. I went to mostly religious schools. Since I graduated from the University of Tennessee, which is obviously a state school, I've been to seminary. I was at Baylor University. I was at the University of Notre Dame. So these are large Protestant and Catholic institutions. And I will tell you that the biggest problem that I see is that it's almost impossible to cut through all of the political ramifications or the political motivators for people making decisions or trying to understand what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And I think you're right that if you read it, even on a plain reading, a lot of this just doesn't make any sense, right? Jesus with an AK-47 or thinking that Trump is some sort of savior figure. It doesn't make any sense, right? So, that being said, I want politics to sort of be taken out of that temporarily. But I don't think we can remove politics fully and completely because I think politics matters for people's lives. And if you're a Christian who has been commanded to love other people, and one of the ways that you can improve their lives and show them love is to try to get good public policy in there because public policy matters for people's lives. A lot of white people don't realize this, right? And the reason white people don't realize this is because the public policy has always been rigged to make their lives better, right? But there's sort of a famous theologian. I know a number of people who like him, studied with him, Stanley Hauerwas, who spent his entire career sort of bashing this notion of politics sort of co-opting the Christian faith. And I think that's important, but you got to take the next step. And this is where Stanley Hauerwas's theology just looks really white, right? Because it doesn't take into consideration that people of color have always had to rely on government in many ways, public policy, to make their lives better. And if you don't care about public policy and you don't care about the politicians that you're putting in there, are you really loving your neighbor? Right? Are you taking into consideration? I mean, are you even loving your enemy? You're called not just to love your neighbor, but your enemy as well, right?
Right.
And so that's what Jesus does. He calls you to do those sorts of things. And so I think we have to read and understand the gospel sort of outside of the American partisan political context, but eventually we have to take our mandate to love and place it within that context. What does it look like? I'm not saying that Jesus would always vote for the Democratic Party. I mean, I certainly don't know. But the reality is that I don't see love of neighbor or enemy emanating from the Republican Party policies that they are articulating. And I don't want to have anything to do with that as a Christian, and I won't have anything to do with that as a Christian. Is the Democratic Party better? I mean, slightly. I think it's slightly better. I have serious problems with our foreign policy. I have serious problems with our support for Israel in the war against Gaza. I have serious problems with the militarized approach to the world that we have. Because I think like a number of people, Stanley Hauerwas for one, who was very influential for me in this context. Martin Luther King Jr. was very influential for me in this context, that Jesus calls us to resolve our problems peacefully, right? And the way you articulated it, I think is very good, which is that politics, the democratic process is one way that we can do that without violence, right? And I think Christians should embrace the democratic process, because we've been called to a life of nonviolence, and the process that we've set up as a democratic society resolves our differences without violence. And this is what's most concerning about the last 12 years, particularly the last 5 or 6 years, is that violence has re-entered domestically into our political life, right? January 6th, I think, was obviously the biggest instance of that, but you're still seeing, I mean, you're seeing it this past weekend, right, with the assassination attempt. These are all very, very, very bad things, and we don't need to do those.
Right, and let me just say that I think those two, though, are completely unrelated, because January 6th was purely political, and last weekend was just a nut, you know. And I know people are going to try to read political stuff into it, but you know, I mean, anybody you're talking about, my take on this is that anybody who had shown up, who might have made this kid famous for killing him, would have been a target. He'd have shot Biden as quick as he'd have shot Trump. He was looking to shoot somebody.
I might take issue with not your assessment of the assassination attempt, but with Trump's January 6th instigations.
Being political?
Sure, I don't know if it was purely political. I think he had plenty of personal motivations to keep himself out of prison.
Well, for the January 6th people, it was political.
Okay. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't talked to any of them.
No, I mean, but what were they doing there? They were there to say that we don't believe that Trump lost the election, and we want to keep him in, and we're going to make you. We're going to stand here and wave signs and yell and scream until you Congress people vote our way. And then when somebody broke a window and went in, then it just kind of went nuts. You know, I don't think they went there with the intention. But I think it built into it, because that's what happens with mobs, right? They go to grab a guy, and next thing you know, he's lynched, right? Back in the 30s.
Mobs and meth.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they really believe that Trump didn't win the election. I mean, I think it's hard. I can't.
You know, that kind of belief is funny.
I mean, I think that a lot of them just want to do what Trump wants them to do.
Have you never talked to anybody who pretended to believe something because it was, that's, you know, the face they wanted to wear, whether they actually believed? It's like, all right, full disclosure, I no longer am a person of faith. Okay, but when I was often astonished, and it always bothered me. I go to church with people who were, I mean, just not religious at all, just pretending. Just, I mean, just had no serious. Or let me just put it this way: so you're riding down the street, the speed limit's 55. You see a cop parked up ahead of you. How fast are you going to go? Right? You're not going to go 56 or 50. You know, you might go 5. You're not going to go 80. Right? So if somebody is a Christian and they believe God is watching them all the time, then they wouldn't do things. I mean, if you saw, if you when you were a kid, when your parents were watching you, you didn't do stuff. They were standing right there. So somebody who actually believes in God and believes that He's paying attention, I mean, then I would say, well, you know, you're going to behave a certain way. I certainly did when I believed. You know, I mean,
Man, I don't know. I want you to go back and read those first couple of chapters of the Bible again.
uh,
We are capable of, yeah.
I know what we're capable of. I'm talking about.
Stuff.
I'm talking about. Here's the thing. It's I have question with people who tell me, you know, I believe in God, and then I watch them do stuff, and I say, well, is he asleep right now? Or, you know, is he not watching? What's going? He or she? What's going on here? And so I just have a problem with people who say they believe but don't behave like they believe. And to me, the majority of what I see on TV or YouTube about MAGA people smacks that way to me.
I mean, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, there's a massive level of hypocrisy, but I think for a lot of them, they don't believe the things that I believe. That's my biggest concern is that they skip over the parts that are inconvenient, and that worries me. Right? I mean, I think Jesus is very clear in the New Testament in a lot of places about his commitment to nonviolence and his wanting his disciples to be committed to that. And I think there's a politics embedded in there too. This would take the discussion a whole different level, but I'm not sure we want to get into that. But I just see a lot of people, you say they believe things, but then they don't do it, so there's a hypocrisy. My concern is that they don't believe a lot of the things that you might think they believe. When you say they believe in God, that's sort of a generic understanding of who God is, and this goes back to their not really understanding the Bible, the Gospels, the things that you read when you read the Bible, right? And
Right.
so I think a lot of them don't really know and understand those sorts of things. And so that's a problem with the church. It's a problem with teaching. It's a problem with pedagogy. We call it catechism, right? There's
Right.
a catechetical
Right.
process that needs to occur over the course of an entire lifetime. And part of the issue is that the leaders who design these catechetical processes don't all agree with what the Bible says either, right? So
Right.
I mean, it's a complicated notion, right? So yeah, I mean, I stand in one particular position, and a lot of the people I go to church with don't stand in that same position, and I still understand my responsibility to be to love them, to interact with them, to learn from them, but also to teach them as best I can. And the same goes for the people who claim not to believe, that aren't people of faith, and people who are of different faith, and people who are avowedly my enemies, right? So I probably have some of those on Facebook. They call me their Facebook friends, but they're really my enemies because they hate me. I think that's okay. I mean, that's fine. I'm just trying to say that my responsibility is to love other people, and that takes on a different shape. It's to try to make their lives better as best I can. I think politics is involved in that at some level. My personal actions are involved in that at some level. There's a whole catalog of institutions that are involved in that at some level. And I fail at that routinely on a daily basis. For all the way from taking care of the most closest people to me, my mom, my wife, my children, right, all the way to strangers. I fail every single day, and I think that's the human predicament. But we just keep carrying on. God has redeemed us, and we will eventually be glorified, and we're not going to get there without God's help at all, and God is the only one who helps us. And I think I've told you this before in class discussions. I mean, I get scared sometimes thinking about what I would probably be like as a person if I weren't a Christian. I would probably be a very bad person. And I still got lots of problems, but I think I try to be someone, and God helps me to try to be someone who's better.
If it's any
So,
consolation, Dr. Bowden, there are maybe 4 professors in my undergrad that I remember at all, and but your class I think was life changing for me, and I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your willingness to reach out, especially a guy like you with your credentials, teaching at a small black college in Savannah. I got to give you all the credit, and thank you very much for all you've done for me.
well, you're welcome, and I appreciate you saying that. I will also say that, I think that I am not just lucky, but I think God has blessed me in a lot of ways by putting me in the situation that I'm in to work with a group of people that I think God has a sort of a special favor for. So, and I actually do believe that. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from. So, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
Well,
uh,
thank you so much
yeah.
for allowing me to talk with you about this, and I hope you'll let me do it again in a couple of weeks or so when some more crazy stuff happens and we have things to talk about. Okay.